The O Cannabis Conference and Expo returns to Toronto June 1st through the 3rd, and there's still some good booth locations available. This exciting event is free for cannabis retailers and will feature Tommy Chong receiving a Lifetime Achievement Award at the O Cannabis Industry Awards. For more information about exhibiting or to register to attend, go to ocannabis.com. That's OCANNABIZ.com. Welcome back to the Talking Hedge. I'm Josh Kincaid, capital markets analyst and host of your Cannabis Business podcast. Today we've got Katrina Golgowski to go over a pitch deck investment from Chile. Katrina, thanks for being back on the podcast.
Thanks, Josh.
So this pitch deck originated in Chile, but it's actually for the Argentine market. And so we're going to kind of do a public service announcement in terms of, things to do, things not to do. All right, so we'll be judging this pitch deck based on our 7 tips to a successful pitch deck. Number 1 being, do they identify the business plan goals? 2, do they know their audience? 3, do they understand the market? 4, have they identified needs and roadblocks? 5, do they know what sets a business apart? 6, have they introduced the team and products? And 7, have they created a summary?
Josh, I'm going to just tell our viewers and listeners that you and I have reviewed this deck ahead of time, and we mean no disrespect to this individual, but we are treating this as a public service announcement type informational opportunity of how not to do this.
We're going to cover this pitch deck. It's 23 pages and it's an idea. And so for anybody out there right now, the economy is in absolute global turmoil and the cannabis industry is not new anymore. So anything past 2015 really isn't about an idea. It's about implementation. And so if you don't already have a license and if you aren't already generating revenue, most of the time an investor is not going to invest. Am I wrong about that, Katrina?
That is correct. There is things called pre-seed funding, where you have a just revolutionary idea, usually in technology or in medicine, but in the cannabis space, absolutely not. And again, if you are just going to write a blank check, we talked about purchasing a distressed asset as opposed to starting from ground zero, which would be a better bet.
And if you don't have that option in Argentina, for example, if you want to be first on the ground, generally that seed funding comes from friends and family round.
That is correct. You don't see a lot of accredited investors or VCs investing before there's something to invest in. Again, there are folks that will invest in a napkin. Literally, there have been deals. There's definitely successful companies that started on a napkin. But in the cannabis space, investing in a napkin is not the best way to proceed. It is incredibly risky, and I would advise against it. Emerging markets are always exciting, but what happens if they don't get a license? What happens if their plan for their building runs into zoning problems? Again, there's so much risk involved, and usually the entrepreneur is not interested in outside investors in the pre-seed funding because, for example, were I to write a check in some type of napkin idea, I'd want significant equity in the company to balance my risk. So let's say I'm going to invest $100,000 in a napkin sketch. I'm probably going to take 95% of your company because all you have is an idea and no money. I have the money, and if I like your idea, it's not worth it. And again, as you and I have discussed, Josh, in the past, if you have money burning a hole in your pocket, just buy a distressed asset and turn it around. That's my advice. And hopefully the individual who submitted this pitch deck can take this advice and sketch out, get a real business plan and try and meet any of the 7 tips for a successful pitch deck, Josh.
We're going to go through this fairly quickly, 23 pages. They don't have a license. It is just an idea. And so this is more of a public service announcement to kind of look at what to do, what not to do, So let's dive right into this. So MA Growing is a corporate group based on production and industry of cannabis for export uh, for Chile and Argentina and Uruguay. So this is an ESL, English as a second language. Sometimes I feel like I'm ESL as well. We've covered decks in the Caribbean. We've covered decks in Asia and India, Macedonia, Eastern Europe, all over. And so we're going to skew this, taking that into consideration.
I like this slide. I learned something. Look at this. Who knew? There's actually graphics related to cannabis and hemp. So thumbs up for educating me.
So for the listeners, it looks like there's some Chinese or Japanese kanji for ganja, and then it goes all the way up to like 10,000 years from ideogram or, cave painting or whatever.
Hieroglyphics.
Right, thank you. So Argentine cannabis, so they want to have a facility there to produce and process and hopefully one day get a license.
Yeah, this is his first mistake. Right out of the gate, he says, I will in the future commence negotiation for this opportunity. And again, you can't start with something like that. It's even questionable whether cannabis is legal in Argentina at the time this was written, and certainly at the time that we are reviewing it. But that's the first flag. I'll start exploring it. Okay, well, you should have already done that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess I would start somewhere where it is legal. So if hemp is legal, start with that. Or if Uruguay, that's federally legal, go there, and then try to get into Argentina or Chile with medical and or hemp when you can. But if you're going to create a deck, start with something that is tangible, something that you can immediately go to. So I would start with Uruguay and or hemp, depending on the legality down there.
Agreed.
So they do kind of mention Uruguay being in South America with foreign law investments. Talks about canopy growth being down there.
This is another thing I don't really like about this pitch deck. For those of you who can see it, and he will continue this, he cuts and pastes information from LinkedIn and the internet regarding government officials, regarding advertising campaigns. It's not original work, and it's not his work. It is just skimming the internet for fill, hence the 23-page pitch deck. And this is another sign for an investor who might give consideration to one of these types of companies. Where is this information coming from? And here, LinkedIn and the internet.
Yeah, 23 pages. This is kind of written, like a story, like a PDF story instead of like a presentation. So there should be a lot more bullet points and graphs and information that's easily digested in, what would you say, maybe a dozen slides, 10 to 15, if that?
Max. Yeah, I mean, some of these pitch competitions, you have 3 minutes, 5 minutes. Mm-hmm. You're not getting through 23 pages. And then the content of what he's providing is his background. Back in the 90s, he did this. And it's not necessarily relevant to this project of cannabis in Argentina. He goes on for pages about this, which is irrelevant. And I wonder if he has these the consents to use some of these photographs of government officials and things like that.
So I think he's identified the business plan goals, which is to produce or process in Latin America somewhere. It's a very, very broad business plan. So understanding the market as well as some roadblocks. So he's kind of talking about the legality. He knows that hemp and cannabis are going to be market movers down there, but that the law is a roadblock. So we're kind of getting there. We're going to skim through this fairly quickly.
The law is a roadblock. No license is a roadblock. Again, slide number 3, pay me and I will start investigating this for you.
So page 10 has a headquarters. So they want to spend about $4 million on a building down in Buenos Aires, Argentina for headquarters.
And this is where it just goes off the rails. And for those of you who cannot see this, he spends an extraordinary amount of time, slide space time, explaining that appearance is very important in Argentina. And as a United States citizen who's never stepped foot in Argentina, I have no idea what the cost of real property in Argentina is, but you do not need a prestige building. And he has identified the building he wants in order to do a startup. And it starts just sliding down from there, Josh.
So page 13 has a 30-70 split. Investors will get 70%. He's going to remain a 30% stakeholder. Talks about profits, earning billions of dollars.
Yep. Billions and billions and billions.
So for investment, they want to move into Argentina and start growing down there.
Yep. For everything that the law will allow. Okay.
All right, so we're going to try and be nice about this. We're on page 16 out of 23, and page 16 says startup costs $24,000 to the CEO. So this is very reminiscent of WeWork, where or even MedMen, where they went out and bought a mansion, $24 million mansion in Beverly Hills, and WeWork CEO has multiple houses, and getting a salary and having somebody pay you just isn't generally how it works. Am I right?
In the investment universe, we want to know what your buy-in is. So how much of your skin do you have in your game? It's not usually approached from this direction. And while it is important to have a salary, to have some type of income for the founders, generally the use of funds does not come out of the gate talking about you have to pay me first.
Yeah, $6,000 a month in salary, US dollars, I'm assuming, is a lot of money. On top of that, he wants $15,000 to rent an apartment. Talking about
As an investor, why would I pay for your housing?
$3,000 for the legalization, hiring people. $30,000 to buy a car. It's necessary to have a luxurious car and fine clothes.
If I'm not going to pay rent, why would I buy a car for you or clothes for you? Now, again, he did explain that appearances are very important in Argentina, but this is not the best use of funds. Just like the prestige building, no. The answer is no. Although I do like his $1,000 to make a website. I really think that is, number one, the best thing on his list. But number two, $1,000 to design and build a compliant website, no, it's not going to happen. So it makes me question, number one, he's putting the numbers for clothes in his pitch deck, but also when he gets to the actual detail you need, the website, he has grossly underestimated its cost.
Yeah, and just to reiterate, I've never seen anybody put in requirements for clothing or a car. I have seen, try to cover expenses and salary. People want to get paid, but clothing and cars, it's pretty crazy. Yeah, and the $1,000 for a website, I would say that he's not really understanding the full price. So if I were to go to Fiverr, for example, I might be able to get away with that, but the quality, like, you get what you pay for. So on top of that, he wants $10,000 or more to hire people. So that's a third set for a hire. He wanted to spend $3,000 to hire people for something, and then $1,000 for a website, and $10,000 for the production in Argentina, I'm assuming, and then $200,000 for lobbying.
I'm gonna stop you there, because the $10,000 is to hire people to do the business plan.
Oh, that's not even to grow. That's just to create a business plan.
It says to hire people to do the business plan.
Mm.
And then the $200,000, and he says maybe more zeros added to that with a smiley face. Uh, no, 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 no.
So I'm assuming that means buying off politicians down there. If you had to add more zeros, you're talking about $2 million US to get it legalized.
Yeah, he says in the text, I need to hire very good lawyers with political influence to change the law. No, no.
Maybe George Soros would be interested in expanding his Uruguay empire into Argentina, but I'm not sure many more people would drop this amount of money to have first mover advantages.
No.
So he wants $6,000 to rent a house or $4,000 to buy the headquarters. This is work, not to be confused with the $1,500 a month he needs to live in an apartment. And then $500,000 for decorating and having furniture and equipment in the headquarters.
And let's clarify for our listeners that this is for the office, not equipment to process the product. This is for couches and desks. Again, getting back to the prestige argument and the appearance argument that he makes early on in his justification for an investor buying him an Audi TT.
All right, so breaking down some monthly expenses: $6,000 for his salary, $3,500 for headquarters, $1,000 for car insurance, fuel, and extras, $120 to have VPs host MA Growing, and $150 for support. And so once they move into the headquarters, they're going to need $10,000 for renting the house, and then $50,000 for other costs and salary, etc. We made it to the end. We're at page 23, and so we don't really have a whole lot to go off of. But again, this is to be expected with somebody who may not have a lot of experience with DEX. Got to kind of take that into consideration. So MA Growing, do we know what it is? It's a producer processor in Latin America.
MA Growing is a paper that hopes at some point, once the law in Argentina has changed, to become a producer processor in Argentina.
So you're going to give them a full point for identifying their business plan goals?
Sure.
Okay. Knowing the audience, I'm going to have to say no. They didn't know the investment audience. There wasn't really an ask. There was a 70-30 split, but they are not really understanding what investors are wanting. Investors don't want to give money to politicians. They want to buy property, plant, equipment, intellectual property, licenses.
Absolutely. I cannot give him a point to know the cannabis audience, to know the hemp audience, or to know the investor audience. No.
Understanding the market. I think I'm going to be generous and give half a point. They understand that there is going to be a market in Argentina and Chile and already existing in Uruguay, but not fully understanding the market in terms of the niche opportunities, or at least they didn't describe it.
Okay, I'll go with you on that one.
Feeling generous today. All right, identifying needs, they did. They said they need a lot of money for wardrobes, but they didn't really say that they needed a lot of things for the company. They did mention roadblocks just being money, but not necessarily the roadblocks to establish the business.
Money, laws, easy. Yeah.
So didn't quite make the mark on number 4. Didn't identify needs or roadblocks. What about knowing what sets the business apart?
I struggled with this one, and I think that this is his biggest failure. And what sets his business apart? The reason we're struggling with this, Josh, is he doesn't have a business. So he doesn't have a product. So there's no standout packaging. There's no standout branding. There's no process improvements. There's nothing for his business. Again, because he doesn't have one. And then second, he doesn't address the competition at all. And this is an utter failure. And the reason it's an utter failure is everybody else is going to try and get in the Argentinian market just like he wants to. And there's big, large LatAm players down there that are already way ahead of him. And if he could just identify, Canopy, he does mention Canopy. If he just sort of modeled some of his pitch deck on what Canopy is doing and piggyback on Canopy, he might be able to improve his deck and go there. But number 5 was not met at all.
Yeah, Clever Leaves in Colombia is a huge producer processor working with a lot of Canadian LPs, and yeah, none of that was mentioned. In fact, the product is the product the brand. I guess he mentioned MA Growing as the product. Didn't mention individual SKUs that they wanted to produce, like flower, pre-rolls, or otherwise.
He didn't really introduce the product. I do like the hieroglyph. The name in and of itself, MA Growing, is neither here nor there. But as you scroll through his deck, he was talking about hemp, cannabis, recreational cannabis, medicinal cannabis. And so I really don't know what his product is. Is he going to be selling CBD, or is he going to be selling medical grade cannabis in Argentina? He did mention export, and once all of these requirements are met with the law, then he can export back and forth. And again, people are doing this already, so I don't think he introduced the product. He has a very nice graphic.
He introduced himself, I think, on the last or second to the last slide, but there wasn't really a summary. So it wasn't a call to action. There wasn't, there was a 70-30 split, but there was no ask. So I think if we tally up all of the money, we can kind of figure what that is. But again, there wasn't that call to action.
Correct.
So if we're feeling generous, we can round up to 2 out of 7 leaves at this point.
Okay.
So definitely some improvements to be made. I think at this point in the game, having an idea is probably not enough. The economy is just not where it needs to be for an idea.
I agree. And yes, Argentina might be a new market, and there might be some tolerance for this type of thing, but it's just not going to fly. I sincerely hope that any investor considering this really does their due diligence.
Yeah, this really is all about having a stake in the game. So if you have an idea, that's great. Probably not going to go anywhere with it unless you have your own friends and family give you that seed funding, that capital that you need to get started. And then we all have ideas about technology, but if you can't implement it, it's just an idea. So if you have a website or some kind of tech that you want to produce, but no means of actually doing it, it's probably not going to go anywhere either. Unless you can have that team and get some startup capital from friends and family, ideas don't generally go anywhere. Investors don't just give money for an idea. There may have been a time, back, when the bull market was rising and people were just throwing money, but definitely not right now.
Definitely not today, and definitely not in the cannabis industry. Again, I applaud this gentleman's efforts and wish him luck.
Mm-hmm. All right. With that, we're going to roll this one up. I'm Josh Kincaid. I want to thank my guest, Katrina Glogowski, angel investor and attorney. Thanks for being back on the podcast.
Thanks, Josh.
I'm Josh Kincaid. This is The Talking Hedge. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, or don't, and I'm out.
Hi, it's Justin Benton, host of the Miracle Plant Podcast, where we discuss this miracle plant that goes by so many names and how it's helping people in so many extraordinary ways. So if you love this plant and you want to hear a story that tugs on those heartstrings and learn more about this plant, then head on over to the Miracle Plant Podcast. You'll be glad you did.